So to give you a bit of background about myself and my expertise, I'm a social psychologist by training. I received my PhD at the University of Jena, and I'm by now specialized in gender equality, social safety, and also diversity and inclusion. And what I do in my research is I look at the translation of policy into practice. And as you know, in many different areas, this doesn't really work quite well. So I'm investigating factors that contribute to this discrepancy between policy and practice. And well, if you use the metrics that Morteza already mentioned as some of the root causes for bullying in academia, I'm actually sort of checking them all. So I received major funding, and I worked with very bright colleagues in my field and published well. So all good on that side. Apart from that, I'm a member of the Dutch National Advisory Committee for Greater Diversity and Inclusion in Higher Education, and I'm an advisor for the Academic Parity Movement and also for the German-based Network Against Power Abuse in Science. And at the University of Jena, I was the co-chair of the Center for Gender Studies and also an alumna of the Young Academy Groningen. So with Morteza and other colleagues over the past couple of years, we have published a lot of articles, empirical opinion pieces, correspondences, theoretical articles. We have currently a call for papers ongoing for a special issue with the European Management Journal about the gender data gap. It's all about bullying, harassment in academia, and about the lack of equality that is resulting from this system, and also the big toll this takes on not only on individuals but also on society as a whole. And so personally, so one of the things that are probably interesting about my background is that I've been born and raised in East Germany. And you can probably imagine that my poor mom is really devastated that like 34 years after the wall came down, her daughter is being fired for issuing criticism on the system, because we were actually under the impression that we were freed from that, right, when the wall came down. But alas. So I finished my PhD in 2009 and then came to the Netherlands, which means that I'm already in Groningen for 13 years. And I have first been working as a postdoc in the social and behavioral sciences faculty. And then in 2013, I became a Rosalind Fellow in the tenure track at the Faculty of Economics and Business. In 2015, I have been tenured. And this year on International Women's Day, I have been fired, or my contract has been terminated based on claims of damaged working relationship. So that's for the precarity that's hidden behind tenure. A short note about the Rosalind Fellow program. This is a program that the University of Groningen is quite proud of. It aims to increase the number of female professors, and it's sort of one of its advertising features is that it's based on clear criteria for promotion. So the program basically claims that the criteria for promotion are so clear that everyone has their own career steps in their own hands, because you know exactly what you have to do to make the next move. And this program has been supported with, until 2019, that is, with just under 17 million euros in Dutch and European taxpayers' money. And many of the recruited women are international, so non-Dutch. And to give you just an anecdotal screenshot or snapshot of the successes. So the idea is that within 10 years, if you fulfill these very clear criteria, you can become full professor. So in my cohort from 2013, 2014, basically all of these women should be at least associate professor or full professor. what you see is that while 50% of the Dutch women in that cohort have become professor, the other 50% are still at the assistant professor level, which is way below what you would expect by now. But if you look at the international women, it's actually much worse. Only 25% of them became professor, 50% were bullied away, and 25% stayed but experienced significant problems. So you see a clear difference here between types of women that are in the program, right? In 2018, according to these very clear criteria that I fulfilled at that point in time, I applied to go from associate professor, let's see, 2 to 1. So it was a very minor step, so nothing, not a big deal you would think. But I didn't get it, and I was presented with ever-changing criteria. Every time I could show that I actually fulfill these criteria, there were other criteria brought up. So eventually I filed a complaint with the faculty board of the Faculty of Economics and Business. In that complaint filing, I actually followed completely the route that was recommended by my employer. And I basically reported a socially unsafe working environment, which is caused by what I perceive to be discrimination in a promotion decision, in which I was required to fulfill criteria that my Dutch and or male colleagues did not have to fulfill. So to give you one concrete example, I had, for instance, 3 times more publications and acquired significantly more research funding compared to a male colleague who was granted the promotion that was denied to me. My complaint has never been investigated. I was told that since my line manager followed the usual procedures, I would have to accept the additional criteria that he was wanting me to fulfill. So that was that. Then in 2019, I published a quite infamous essay by now, Undoing Gender in Academia, Personal Reflections on Equal Opportunity Schemes, where I actually describe exactly these policy practice gaps, right, in that program. So basically how the formal policy of gender equality and diversity policy is undermined by daily inequality practices. This is not so peculiar for academia. To be honest, I have a PhD student who's investigating and basically finding exactly the same mechanisms in the police force. So it's not actually that surprising that this happens. This essay was accepted for publication after 6 months of editorial peer review by 3 of the leading academics in the field of organizational behavior and management, and basically lies completely in my area of scientific expertise. Now, what has been said a lot from the faculty is that my claims of discrimination were unfounded. Now, there is a lot of evidence actually from both the Netherlands as a complete country, but also from Groningen and the faculty itself that basically substantiate my claims rather profoundly. So one of these is the report on harassment in Dutch academia, which for the first time actually showed behaviors they were coining as scientific harassment that were specifically sabotaging women scientists' careers. Among these scientific harassment behaviors were changing unclear, untransparent, or arbitrarily applied promotion criteria that were quite often named by the 53 women scholars that were interviewed. In 2020, our own universities, or my university's confidential advisor actually stated in a newspaper, so you can basically read that for yourself, that the promotion requirements seem to be a stumbling block because they change and or are adjusted during the process. Criteria for objectively determining whether someone is eligible for a promotion seem to be applied subjectively. It seems that this problem is a university-wide problem and can no longer be dismissed as an individual problem, but is a system problem. And last but not least, in 2021, 2 reports came out for the University of Groningen and for my faculty specifically. One is the Young Academic Groningen report on harassment, which was based on 26 interviews with former and current employees, where we actually also found that retaliation against reporters of misconduct was quite widespread and concerned, among other things, taking away reporters' teaching, taking away their PhD students, their research projects, forcing them through coaching and mediation, and quite often actually bullying them out of the university. And based on these findings, we made some very concrete recommendations on how to move on and improve that system. And these recommendations, probably not so surprising, have never been taken up by the board of the university. And the second report was conducted partly by an external agency and concerned diversity, inclusion, and social safety at the Faculty of Economics and Business. And while the report itself is not publicly accessible, findings of the report have been covered by our university newspaper, and I have the links in the slides. But one of the things they were saying is that among the various subgroups of the entire population of FEP, such as internationals, women, and junior researchers, respondents are a lot more pessimistic to varying degrees. Some employees feel unsafe at the faculty. The report includes mentions of verbal aggression, discrimination, and bullying. And the dean of the faculty actually, in one of these newspaper articles, acknowledges that the criteria for awarding resources and promotions have not always been clear. What's interesting about this report is that it also offers empirical data that substantiates discrimination in salaries and career chances and promotion. So you would say quite some good foundations for my perceived discrimination. Anyhow, after I published the essay in 2019, I actually finally fulfilled these additional promotion criteria my line manager asked me to fulfill. But then rather than being promoted, I was exposed to 4 to 5 years of harassment, intimidation, and threats of being fired over the publication by actually all professors of my department and the dean of the faculty. Where they were insisting that my soft skills were lacking, that I had no communication skills, and that I would have to undergo an improvement trajectory and coaching. And I mean, those of you who probably have experienced similar things will not be surprised. It's all following a pattern that is quite common, right? So this might sound horrible if you hear about it for the individual person, but the pattern is always the same. And we hear that also in the advocacy groups and the academic parity movement when we are talking to targets over and over again. So my line manager sent an email to the entire department claiming that because part of the content of this article referring to the essay can be considered as inappropriate and damaging to the university, our department and specific members of the department, we take this issue very seriously. And the dean sent a letter to the Journal of Management Studies telling them that my essay was not based on any objective proof, was accusatory and personal, and had damaged my working relationship with the faculty and would therefore also damage my career. Interestingly, so because I was quite surprised, because the essay, those of you who read it maybe have noticed that as well, is quite mild and doesn't name any names or points fingers at specific people. But then I started doubting myself, of course, right? So I had the essay translated into Dutch because I thought maybe this is just a language issue. And I was also consulting the university's confidential advisor for scientific integrity. And he read the essay and he also confirmed that he was not seeing any individual accusations, but really just a system critic. And he said, and this is probably the most mature reaction that you would expect from someone working at the university. He said, you know, you don't have to agree with every point raised in that essay, But it's a very good starting point for having a fruitful discussion. And this is, in fact, what many of the faculties used the essay for. They were actually reading the essay and were thinking like, oh, maybe we should have a hard look on our own policies and see whether these actually do what we intend them to do. So anyhow, I had to go through mediation with all the professors of the department, and afterwards I was pressured to sign an agreement telling me I was not to publish critically anymore, and I would not file complaints in the future. And of course, I refused to sign that. Upon which the dean of the faculty ordered me to undergo mediation with my line manager again until I would agree with them. And then you can imagine that this is, of course, an impossible situation. I was threatened to be fired before, like really in my face. So I felt actually forced to take a lawyer with me into the mediation, for whom I had to pay privately. And it was all such a mess. But also the situation was so hopeless. So either I would go on mediating like until eternity, or I would agree to this nonsensical agreement. So eventually, after trying this for a couple of rounds, I became sick and was actually on sick leave for half a year. So when I was first talking to the company doctor, I was actually, it took me like 15 minutes to even talk straightly. I was only just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. Anyhow, the dean and the professors then threw me out of the department because of what they called a failed mediation. And so if you're wondering whether I should be telling you all of this, this is all documented in writing in the court case. It has been said publicly in the hearing, which was public. And you can also find it in the verdict, which has been translated to English by University of Groningen. And the link is here in the slides. So when I became better again, I mostly worked from home. So I actually didn't go into the faculty for, I don't know, 2.5 years. In that time, I still was like a member of the personnel faction in the University Council, which is the central participatory body in Dutch universities. I was coordinator and lecturer in the Faculty of Arts. I was co-chair for the Center of Gender Studies at the Faculty of Arts. And actually by now, my colleagues from from Gender Studies publicly announced that they actually wanted me there, which is interesting against universities' claim that they couldn't find another place for me outside of the Faculty of Economics and Business, which played a big role in the judge's decision that my employment could be terminated. So basically, despite the judge concluding that my supervisors played a large, if not decisive, role in the damaged working relationship because of the way they responded to the JMS article, she decided that my employment can be terminated because of the damaged working relationship. This seems to be a peculiar thing about Dutch labor law. I have no idea how that is in other countries, to be honest. But this ruling really has caused a lot of outrage, and I think also fear among my academic colleagues in the Netherlands, because it just sets a horrendous precedent. Where one of my colleagues put it like this: the court verdict basically says that you can be fired even if your employer is partly responsible for the creation of a damaged relationship, which is a get out of jail free card for employers. All they should do is to escalate the situation until it becomes unworkable. And other authors acknowledge the grave implications for academic freedom in the Netherlands, stating that academics in the Netherlands discovered they don't have effective academic freedom. Although I might add, I mean, if you put it to the test, we might find out that we don't have academic freedom in many countries, not just the Netherlands. So here are some impressions of what followed. There were protests, there was this huge MI Next campaign, there were a lot of articles about the case. It's also still going on, basically. And what I'm very grateful for is that the people behind this campaign also put online an open letter and a petition, as well as a crowdfunding. And the petition has been signed by now more than 4,000 times by quite famous scholars of modern time. For instance, Sarah Ahmed, Judith Butler, and Morteza. But I think who is really to be commended for their bravery are all my colleagues on precarious contracts who were also signing and who really stuck out their necks for me, knowing what can happen to them. So I'm really, really grateful for all the support I get, knowing that I'm by far not the only one. I'm just the most visible one at this point in time. And we see this happening again and again, over and over globally. So I really think it's time for this to stop. And with that, I will end. Thank you for your attention. I will stop sharing now.